Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Atlantic Council. I'm Damon Wilson. I'm Executive Vice President here at the Atlantic Council. On behalf of the Council, on behalf of the Future Europe initiative of the Atlantic Council, I want to welcome you here for our conference today.
Thank you, Damon. My name is Rastislav Káčer. I'm Chairman of GLOBSEC, who's a partner of the Atlantic Council. On this day, I'm very proud and delighted to welcome you all to this conference. And let me take the right title of that, the United States and Central Europe, celebrating Europe whole, free, building the next century together. And I'm really delighted that the leading think tank in Central Europe is partner to you, the Atlantic Council, a long-time fellow and a personal friend to be here today with you to launch this.
Terrific, thank you. I'm going to ask if we okay back there? Are we too close to each other? Give me. I know. All right, you give me direction. You give me help. Let's get this right. So, first of all, thank you, Roster. Thanks, Ambassador Káčer. We're really grateful to you for your partnership, the partnership we have with GLOBSEC, to the entire team at GLOBSEC that's helped us run this over the next couple of days, and to all of our guests and speakers who have come. Many of you who've traveled across the Atlantic to be with us. We're really grateful for your time. I want to welcome you all that are here in person, but I also want to welcome everybody that's following along with the proceedings online and watching this live streamed. And if you're doing that, I encourage everybody to join the conversation, to amplify the messages using the hashtag #StrongerWithAllies. The goal of this conference is to underscore, from our perspective, the U.S. commitment to a Europe whole and free, with Central Europe as an integral part of it. But it's also about how to develop an agenda for the U.S. Central European relationship, ties for the future, as our title suggests, building the next century together. So we want to think ambitiously, yes, about the next century, in which what we consider our permanent alliance will provide the kind of security that was absent for much of the 100 years of our first set of 100 years of relations between our countries.
And this year, it's a sort of special. So this initiative, I think it's extremely well timed, because if we will look back, we are celebrating, or well, sometimes it's not always reason to celebrate everything, just reminding ourselves of some milestones in history. 100 years, 101 years of the settlement of after World War I, which completely changed Europe. And with the assistance of Woodrow Wilson and the United States, the map of Europe was changed. Czechoslovakia of 20s and 30s was a prime example of democracy, prosperity. This was very substantial contribution of the United States. Then the fall of Berlin Wall, it's 30 years. Without the United States, I wonder how Europe would look like in this critical time. 20 years out of the first NATO enlargement by 3 new members. Then 15 years of a large NATO enlargement, which both you and me, Damon, we were quite intimate part of. Ivan Korčaglu is here as well. And then we got to remind ourselves that these anniversaries really changed the map of Central Europe and put Central Europe as a part of Europe whole free together. And sometimes we should think how this would look if we failed, if this didn't succeed. We look in the eastern Ukraine, we look to unsettled parts of Balkans still today. I think this was a major, major success. Without contribution of the United States, this wouldn't be possible, and this was the best, as Dan Friedhofen says, combination of reason, of the values and the interest combined, producing the best result.
So Roster, because of the energy we're projecting, we're going to move away from that mic right there. Perhaps, is this, Chaz, you got us?
Yep.
Chaz, please, that might help a little bit as well. So apologies for the feedback, particularly for those of you online. All right, it is precisely because of that this conference is part of a broader commitment of the Atlantic Council to Central Europe. So let me just offer some context before we get underway. In the wake of the fall of the Berlin Wall, I would argue that Central Europe forged a very special relationship with the United States. As Americans, many of those Americans in this room tonight assisted these formerly captive nations in their transformations into free market democracies, and then into allies in NATO and members of the European Union, and soon after that, later as coalition partners in battle. And in the past decade, however, you could argue that Central Europe, in some respects, came to be taken for granted here in Washington, as our attention shifted elsewhere, largely for pretty understandable reasons. And I think as a consequence, you can look across the region, you can look across the situation in our country, and you could wonder if the transatlantic bonds have receded a little bit. That American engagement in the region did it ebb for a little while. Electorates that were strained by an economic turmoil began to question this whole premise and promise of what is a Europe whole and free, what's its value. And against this backdrop, we saw a revanchist Kremlin move in, take advantage, and begin to try to halt that eastward march of democracy, to begin to undermine some of the post-Cold War gains that we experience, and to begin to sow mistrust within our own societies. And now we've seen China has shown up in a really serious way for the first time in the region. And so the United States, with its European partners, needs to be present in a serious way, in a major way. And unfortunately, since the illegal annexation of Crimea, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that's begun to change. We've begun to see this really change in a serious way. And that's what our effort, our common effort here, is aimed at, to help us ensure that we as institutions, as a broader community, can go on offense to help mobilize the alliance, to develop and implement strategies that are going to bolster ties between the United States and Central Europe, and to reinvest in that special relationship with the region. It's through this work, through that engagement, that we're trying to build stronger people-to-people ties, working with other foundations and the interns that we have here, the fellows who are coming from the region, and to foster champions of the transatlantic relationship like yourselves in the region as well.
Well, we've been working together for a long time, but today it's, anyway, a little special because I'm very proud to announce that we signed together a special memorandum today about our partnership on setting up an ambitious agenda for strategic partnership and common commitment to Europe whole and free based on democratic values and shared interest. And we want together, working together, set up a very constructive agenda for the US and Central European ties for the future. And I'd like to quote Fred Camp, the president and CEO of the ACUS here, and let me do the right quote. During times in which our democratic societies are facing unprecedented challenges, we cannot take the transatlantic relationship for granted. Against the backdrop of global uncertainty, it is now more important than ever to unite with partners that share a common commitment to working together to shape a better future. In there, this is a delight that we achieved together joint forces to, with a shared purpose to galvanize this transatlantic leadership to secure peaceful and prosperous Europe, whole Europe, and Central Europe, a part of a strong Europe together with the United States.
Ambassador Káčer, we're really pleased to announce the strategic partnership with GLOBSEC as a way that will allow us to integrate our work together, increasingly our research, our analysis together, to cross-fertilize our programming. But I think more importantly, a commitment to help foster the next generation of voices that will carry this forward. And within this partnership, we're going to really start in two key areas. One is this whole sort of Central Europe initiative and how we bolster the connections between the United States and the region and how we give life to that. And the second way is really to put that partnership into action by exposing, identifying, and analyzing disinformation that's been a problem in many of our societies. So as part of this fellowship, we're delighted to announce that our Digital Forensics Research Lab, working with the Global Communications Program in Bratislava, is going to establish what we call a joint digital research unit to have our researchers based in Bratislava working together to combat the scourge of disinformation and protect our democracies and our societies.
Yep. So we are already putting this partnership into action today at the spring GLOBSEC forum in Bratislava. We were presenting the report, a joint report. Today we are going to showcase this recent Atlantic Council and GLOBSEC report, which is titled The United States and Central Europe, Tasks for a Second Century Together. As I mentioned, we already did the European side presentation in Bratislava in spring, and I'm delighted that we have that. We follow on this here in Washington. The aim of the paper is to offer constructive policy recommendations to bolster this US-European strategic partnership with a special focus on Central Europe. And also we want to underline the progress which has been achieved in the last years. As you mentioned, we should not take things for granted, and we should look at the achievements, what we've done. These ideas, which will be shortly presented by Dan here, will offer a good food for thought and ground for our today's debate. This conference involving media, researchers, key decision makers, lawmakers, will bring a better understanding to this strategic importance of Central Europe, I believe, but also to the ties which are strategically so important for Central Europe as well, in the areas of security, trade, defense, democracy, all of the dimensions.
So before we proceed with the program this evening, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge those that have had and have gotten involved in the Council's work on Central Europe to make it possible. We're going to have a significant announcement later on at the conclusion of this program. But before we get there, I just want to tip my hat to those who have stood with us the past couple of years as we built out our work on Central Europe. Ambassador Ron Weiser, Ambassador April Foley, Ambassador Colleen Bell, Ambassador Victor Ash, Ambassador Todd Sedgwick, the Hungarian Initiatives Foundation, Bank Pekao, PZU, Discovery, Imitel, Google, Bank Polski, PZU, LOT Airlines. These have been our partners in helping to stand up our work, and Darius Midowski as well. I also just want to acknowledge the support that we've had from the EU delegation and the embassies of the Slovak Republic, of Poland, of Hungary, the Czech Republic, Romania, in our work, and we'll see in some of the wine and beer that we enjoy later this evening from them as well. So now we've set the scene, we've given you a little bit of context about what we're trying to do here. Let's get this program started. And we have, I think, an exciting program tonight and something that's going to continue tomorrow as well. But we're going to begin the program this evening with something that's unusual for the Atlantic Council. A lecture by one of our very own, by Ambassador Daniel Fried.
Well, Ambassador Fried is going to address the title, The United States in Central Europe, What's Gone Right, What's Gone Wrong, and What's Next. And we asked kindly Dan to anchor this two-day conference because he's got the ideas. He's the man who needs very little introduction here in town. He's a serious career, one of the most respected career diplomats of the State Department. But he needs even less introduction in Central Europe because everybody knows him and he knows everybody out there. He's got such an intimate knowledge throughout his 44 years of service and his commitment to Central Europe. So it's very hard to trick him. You know, he's a tough guy on this, and he's been always. But to me, he is an example of a diplomat who was able to advocate for the best combination of love and reason in U.S. foreign policy and achieve the most out of that. And that's a huge respect to you, Dan, for that.
Indeed. When I just look at who we have here tonight, I see so many people who have been architects of this whole vision of a Europe whole and free that includes Central Europe, who are working on that every day. But Dan has an extraordinary record here. Indeed, when so many believed that the Iron Curtain was immutable, that we simply had to assume a Central Europe lost and repressed under Soviet domination and imported communism, Dan imagined alternatives. Dan could sense the thirst of freedom among the people. He knew people who were determined to shape their own destiny and was willing to hear them out and at times willing to take a bet on them. Ambassador Fried began his career serving in Leningrad, a very different time and place, in Belgrade. He worked in the Office of Soviet Affairs, something that thankfully no longer exists. And I think historically, he served on the Poland desk, where much of history began to unfold before his eyes, and obviously in Poland itself. And it was in that role that Ambassador Ash and others know well that Dan recognized the impending collapse of communism, and he began to help formulate an American strategy which ultimately led to NATO enlargement and to the idea of a NATO-Russia relationship. But to me, Dan's a lot more than a strategist. He was my boss. He was my mentor, and he was someone who inspired me to understand how the United States can be a force for good when our interests advance with our values together, and when we have big, bold ideas. And so with that, we want to invite Ambassador Dan Freed to the stage to share some big, bold ideas with us. Thank you, Dan. Thank you.